What is up, ladies and gentlemen of the Marvel Cinematic Universe? Welcome to my Loki Season 2, Episode 5 breakdown, recap, and review, and we're here at the penultimate episode. We're going into the finale next week, and things seem to be getting very, very, very important for what this means for the greater consequences of the MCU from here on out. So as always, we're going to recap the episode, go over some of the details, and then, of course, I want you guys to stick around for the end where we go over a bunch of theories. We're going to talk a bit about Renslayer and what we have to see next episode. Obviously, Victor Timely, because we didn't see him as I thought we wouldn't, but we now might see him again given the way this episode ends off, and a whole bunch of other things. Go ahead and leave a like on this video if you do go on to enjoy it, and of course subscribe for more videos like this. So we pick up basically where we left off with the temporal tidal wave, as I call it, making the screen go completely white, and then we see Loki's face there with a tear rolling down it because he thinks basically everything is about to end, but it turns out everything didn't really end, or I mean, as we go on to find out, it is ending. It just took a while to catch up. At this point, nobody is in the room with him, and I don't know about you guys, but let me know down in the comments below. I was thinking, okay, well, did Sylvie get out of there with her tempad? That's something they didn't really address in the episode. I think you have to assume she used the He Who Remains tempad thing that she's got and has had since the ending of season 1, which she is also, I do just want to kind of spit this out there. I know I'm going off on one already, but she's kept that really secret this whole time. So I do wonder if the He Who Remains little device that she has, if it could play a larger part in the finale maybe, but maybe not, because why would you need that if you've now got the upgraded and overpowered version of Loki's time slip? But anyway, as Loki wanders around the TVA, nobody is there. This is when he starts time slipping, and we see himself looking at himself flicking through the TVA guidebook. And I like the way they did this because he then goes on to pick up the TVA guidebook, and then lo and behold, he experiences the same thing again, just from the other perspective. And I want you guys to bear in mind how time slipping works here, because with the upgrade a little bit later on, I feel like it's working a bit differently, and it just gets a bit timey-wimey confusing, if you will, so I want to pick your brains about that. But this is where the spaghettification begins. And so this is where Loki begins to time slip once again, and now he is going to the different branches that his friends are on. So after the ending of last episode, this is something a lot of us saw coming, but what I liked about seeing B15, Mobius, OB, you name it, all in their branched original versions of their characters' timeline is that each character has retained a little bit of themselves in their TVA version of themselves. And I know we kind of already knew this with Mobius, and a lot of us ever since season 1 put it together that his original branched version of himself would be having something to do with jet skis. So lo and behold, with Mobius in the TVA, it was the whole jet ski thing. With Hunter B15 and her Dr. Willis mode, she's always wanted to help people out as Hunter. With OB, he was a scientist still, but he wanted to write, so seeing OB talking about the TVA guidebook this season and how everyone has a copy and that they should read it, it's kind of similar to seeing him go in the bookstore and putting his books everywhere, like he's probably gone around the whole of the TVA and done and dropped a copy of his TVA guidebook on every single person's desk. Then, of course, with Casey and his Frank version of himself escaping from Alcatraz and talking about, using the tempad later to break into bank vaults. Well, obviously we had Casey in the TVA have his little loot drawer full of Infinity Stones and other powerful artifacts from the MCU. So after a few initial time slips of seeing Casey, or should I say Frank, and them freaking out, and then him freaking out Dr. Willis, or should I say B15, this is when we get a bit of an extended scene with that of arriving to Mobius's branch timeline of 2022, Cleveland, Ohio, at Piranha Power Sports, and his name is Don. Now, what we learn here is, on top of him just, living his best salesman life, because he is a salesman, don't get me wrong, and I think a lot of people understand that working retail can be, a struggle at times, but he seems to really have a passion for what he's selling, so it makes you think, and let me know down in the comments below if you think Mobius would be envious of the other job that he has. But to get on a more serious note, he has left something behind that is no joke, because we learned in the episode that his son was trying to call him, and then his other son was trying to call him, and that he is a single dad. And you have to think, when Mobius inevitably learns about that, how much of a conflict is this going to cause for him? And this kind of goes to the conversation with Sylvie and Loki a little bit later about, I know he who remains plucks these people from their lives, but they've still lived their TVA lives, so they should still get a choice to go back to the very timeline branch that they came from, or whether to stay. And now with Mobius having literally 2 kids, oh man, that is going to be a massive headache for him. But before we revisit Mobius, this is where we go to OB, what was his actual name? Was it still Ouroboros? I actually can't remember. After trying to buy a copy of his own book, which he actually still put on the bookstore shelf, which they weren't even selling, so I don't know what his idea was there when they were to scan it. Either way, he returns back to his home/workshop, which looks very, very similar to his workshop in the TVA, which again, I guess could be a reference to the fact that he made it look similar in the TVA, even though his memory would have been eventually wiped from this version of himself, even though I think people are theorizing, was OB's mind ever wiped? I have to think that it was, because Kang did order that with Renslayer a long time ago. So Loki time slips right in front of him. He finds out that he's also a scientist as well as a writer, so this is where they put their brains together. And obviously, the main priority is getting back to before the temporal loom melted down, and to do that, this version of OB suggests that he needs to learn to control his time slipping. And just before Loki time slips away, he gives OB the TVA guidebook, which he technically wrote, and this allows him to spend, I think, 18 or 19 months, as he says later on, actually developing a proto-tempad. And it is pretty cool. Like, there is lots of things within his own workshop, or this version of his workshop, that are somewhat, I guess, familiar to the TVA workshop. You can even say little things like the taser stick that he tests out on Loki to try and activate his time slipping was a very proto version of the pruning stick, or what he could technically go on to develop it. This is what I mean. It gets weird when you think about it, because he wrote the book, yet he said that he learned everything he knew from Victor Timely, but then that's the whole Ouroboros life into death, but then the rebirth of life and then into death, and just the cycle repeating again. I don't even really know what I'm talking about right now, but this is where things get really cool, because what I liked about this scene is when Loki time slipped to Mobius, we had Mobius with his sons Kevin and Sean. Now, what I felt was really nice about this scene here, and it kind of opened up a broader sense of context, of which I think fans have definitely looked into before, between that of the relationship of Mobius and Loki, and obviously how this show has just immensely developed Loki's character from that of like a very selfish, I don't know, cold-hearted, backstabbing version of Loki in Avengers to the man he is now, who cares and loves for other people. But in this moment here, there seems to be a bit of a metaphor, if you will, or like a comparison that you can give to Loki and Thor when it comes to Mobius and his sons, which in turn, I guess you could say, Mobius would be Odin in this situation. And I have no idea if they tried to do anything with that, with his name being Don. I guess Odin's name isn't Odon, so maybe not. So what I mean by this is we have Kevin, I believe he had the lighter or the matches, and we have Mobius getting a bit pissed off at that, and thus Kevin runs away all wild, and I guess you could liken that to Thor. And with Mobius, I guess, being in this example like Odin, he gets his other son, Sean, to go after him, promising him a puppy, and that's when Sean is like, oh, and a snake too. And obviously, with regards to Loki, just Norse mythology, and I just can't really see how this could have been accidentally put in, so obviously it's a very deliberate reference. Mobius's son, Sean, wanting a puppy/dog and a snake can of course be seen as Loki's children in Norse mythology, the dog/puppy that Mobius mentioned being Fenrir the wolf, and obviously the snake being Jormungandr. So I thought that was just like really sweet, because sure, like we've all gathered that Mobius and Loki are pretty close and they care for one another, and that's only got more and more strong throughout the 2 seasons. But I guess with the whole Mobius being Odin in this situation, does that hint the friendship that Loki has with Mobius could be symbolic of the bridges that I guess he wants healed between the issues that he has, maybe potentially unresolved with his father, because you can't really forget where this version of Loki was taken from in season 1, episode 1, and the character he was way back then. I mean, I know he saw the future in that summary on like the little cinema screen, but he didn't live through any of that. It moved him, if you remember, but still, he comes from a time of where he's got some issues there, and I guess you could say it's being healed in a roundabout way through his relationship that's being explored with Mobius. And I'm not quite saying that Mobius is meant to be a father figure to Loki, but I do feel like he grounds him in so many ways. He's set him on the straight and narrow in so many ways of the past couple of seasons, and I do think they're more like friends, but yeah, I just couldn't really not see what they were somewhat going for in this moment. But let me know if you agree or disagree or have a different interpretation of this moment. This is where the recruiting begins with Mobius. He's worried, of course, about leaving his kids behind, which has technically been done for a long, long time. But at the same time, with the way this time logic works, as pointed out by Loki here, and again with the Doctor Who reference, I suppose, saying to his companions that they can come back at any point in time, and it being like they never left, so they won't really need to worry about leaving anything behind at all. So this is where we're getting towards the end of the episode and where things are going to get very, very big going into that finale. So after collecting everyone else, the squad is more or less back together at Obi's workshop, where everyone apart from Sylvie, that is, which is when Loki goes to Sylvie. And I found it interesting that she definitely sensed him, like as she was getting into a car, she sensed him coming before we heard the sound effect of the time door even appearing, let alone Loki walking through it. So I don't know if that's just meant to symbolize the fact that they're both Lokis and they're connected on a, I don't know, atomic level. Now they go to a bar. Loki explains what happened to everyone after the temporal freaking wave loom reset everyone's lives. Sylvie makes quite a good point here, finally. This is something where this was an episode where I didn't get really that annoyed with her, but she makes the point of how everyone's finally got back into their real lives, and that's a good thing. And we have a little bit of a debate here, and I guess this could be larger, somewhat foreshadowing to where Loki may end up, and theories that many people have had with regards to how he's going to be like the Loki who remains. Because Loki poses some questions here which can be seen as somewhat odd. Like, you can see where Sylvie's coming from. I guess you can see where Loki is coming from, because he says, how many, if they had a choice, would have chosen to stay? And he's saying, like, chosen to stay in the TVA. But as Sylvie points out here, well, it was never their choice to begin with. He who remains took all of these people and put them in the TVA. So if that never happened, obviously we would have had Mobius or should I say Don, chill out with his kids forevermore. But as Loki says, I can kind of get it. Well, at the same time, I guess that has happened and he has lived a life in the TVA, so he should still have a choice now to return to the TVA if he wants to or not. Because it may seem at the first instance, oh, it's going to be so obvious that some people would want to return to their original life. But I guess maybe not, because if you've then gone on to lead a whole new life, you now have like a whole new memory of everything. So even though it may seem obvious that you might want to go back, some people genuinely might not want to, even though this does sound like a bit of copium, if you will, from Loki, because as it's revealed in this moment when Sylvie was basically like, let's cut the shite here, what is it that you really want? He says that he wants his friends back and he doesn't want to be alone, which was a very touching moment in not only this episode, but in the entire series, in the entire continuity of Loki in the MCU, if you will, given, as I said earlier, from where Loki began to where he is now. So Loki goes back, somewhat sulking, to the workshop. Meanwhile, we have Sylvie going to the record store, and this was a pretty cool scene. I really like the way it was shot, the way the effects were implemented in this moment, because we have Sylvie go to the back of the store, which is where we first see somebody try and enter the store and they just get spaghettified. And then the same thing starts happening to the store owner's coffee cup, the coffee. He tries running after Sylvie and he gets spaghettified. And then ultimately that the whole branch is getting spaghettified. And I was just kind of starting to think, as I wrote down in my notes here, everything starts getting spaghettified around Sylvie, but I'm not sure why it doesn't quite get her. For a second, I was thinking, like, are you invulnerable, or is it more just for writing reasons that you kind of wanted a cool shot, so I guess the temporal radiation didn't spaghettify you, but it did everything around you? I don't know, but then she did actually end up getting spaghettified. So I don't know, that's a bit nitpicky, but I'm not gonna lie, it was a cool shot as she was going through the time door and everything was just, again, turning into these strands of spaghetti as the branch completely collapsed. And again, she opened that time door with He Who Remains as Tempad. I want to remind you all, will that come into play somehow next episode? But again, I don't see how. I thought that device was going to be somewhat more important, but I don't really see how it could be more important than Loki's new powers that we're about to talk about now. So this is where we go back to Loki in the workshop, telling the others to go back to their own lives, their branches. They're all confused because they're like, dude, you just told me the whole of existence is at stake, and now you're telling us to go back. And so this is where Sylvie comes in and warns them that they can't really go back to their lives because everything is falling apart. So this is where everything starts getting spaghettified once again. So first the Tempad, and then, from OB to Casey to everyone, even Sylvie gets spaghettified in this moment. And I was thinking, okay, so why so selectively? But what I was more interested in, and again, I don't know if this is plot armor, because as I kind of nitpicked with Sylvie getting out of the record store, but notice how Loki didn't spaghettify in this moment. Now, this could be because he might be invulnerable to temporal radiation, because all episode he was already avoiding it, and then in this moment, everyone around him was literally getting spaghettified because of the temporal radiation, and somehow, even though he's more or less engulfed in it, it wasn't affecting him. So this kind of could go back to how, even though he got pulled out of the temporal loom by Mobius to fix the whole time-slipping thing at the beginning of the season, Loki's temporal aura, as a result of that, could have been messed with. I guess you could argue it might have been eliminated, so maybe that makes him, and the very fact that he's glitching out in the way he is, invulnerable to the radiation and thus spaghettification, unlike how it affects everyone else, even Sylvie. But Loki, maybe not. And if you think about this, given that the finale is next week and they need to do the thing with the throughput multiplier or whatever with regards to making the temporal loom fit the capacity for more and more branches, Loki, if he is invulnerable to the temporal radiation, could walk out on that bridge and maybe do it himself and not quite end up like Victor Timely. And now that everyone disappears in this moment in front of him, he then screams and conveniently controls his time slip. And so this is where he time slips right to the moment of where Sylvie arrived, warning them about everything falling apart. And I have to admit, this is where I said earlier to bear in mind how time slipping works. If you guys remember when Loki said hello to himself at the TVA at the beginning of the episode, in this moment I was like, I don't really get it, because if he time slipped as he does before, there's usually another version of himself there. So, as we saw earlier, he ran into himself, or in the other episodes, he pruned himself because he was in that same period of time and space when he time slipped. So, when he time slips back to the moment of where Sylvie comes in and warns everyone, he's now time slipping like into himself. Why isn't it working the way it worked before? Maybe I'm missing something. Let me know down in the comments below, but it seems now with Loki controlling these time slipping powers, there's no longer a duplicate of him in the past or the future or wherever he time slips to. It seems he is just the version of whoever was there in the first place. So I don't know if that's them being inconsistent with their own logic in the universe, or, to be fair, as OB says, his time slipping is evolving. So maybe this is an evolved version of time slipping, and that's what allows him to actually sink into the body of whatever period of time and space he travels to and occupies. And what he actually occupied with the version of himself that was already there, he then becomes that version of himself. So this is where Loki says it's not about when, where, or why, but who. He says that he can rewrite the story, and so he time slips back to the temporal room before the meltdown happens, and thus leaving behind the other branched versions of the characters. I don't know what's going to happen with them, or if we're going to see them again, or they're just kind of standing in the room just like, or if that will never happen now because Loki, I don't know, this is where it gets paradoxy, because now he's gone back and he's going to prevent the meltdown. So would that have continued to happen? But if that gets cancelled out, would this version of Loki have even got the upgrade? I don't know. So with Loki now saying that he can rewrite the story, and he's got an upgraded version of time slipping, and where he can go back, and in that room right before it melted down, again, there should be another version of himself, but I guess it doesn't work that way anymore. He's now the god of timelines, the Loki who remains, or it may be more of a reference to the source material of Loki, agent of Asgard, and he could be the god of stories. And it really does seem like it's going that direction, and where he again is effectively going to be the Loki who remains, controlling the way reality somewhat unfolds. But I am super fascinated how they're going to distinguish the version of He Who Remains, and obviously controlling a timeline to obviously not let certain things happen like the other Kangs. How is Loki going to do it any differently? Because ultimately, if he is more forgiving and has more morals and wants other branches to exist, then how are you going to sort out the Kang problem? But then now we have a whole thing in real life outside of all of this where, as many of you have heard, they might be pivoting away from the whole Kang thing. So they might not even be going there. And I guess that can still be factored into the story. But it is making me think, like, how overpowered is this power with Loki time slipping the way he is now? Like, anything that goes wrong with Kang or in the universe or whatever, can he not just literally time slip back? And it's, again, if there's not a duplicate version of himself there, he is like a living time stone, essentially. And also with this inbuilt time stone, time slipping upgrade that he has, it does make me wonder if he's going to go back to other places, especially now that he's grown as a character, maybe after ascending to the Loki who remains, that I feel, again, is maybe quite typical of where he's going to end up in the finale. Let me know if you have any other ideas or if you want to expand on that. He could go to places such as Asgard, but then again, I don't know if we're going to get like a proper reunion with other characters such as Thor or Odin, but technically he does have that power now. And of course, next episode, we still need to continue on with Renslayer and what's happening there, especially as she's going to be sent to the Void now. And as I said in last week's breakdown, I feel like she's going to somehow connect with Alioth, and I think Alioth will still be around despite being enchanted by Loki and Sylvie towards the end of season 1. And now that Loki has time slipped back to the moment in where the temporal loom hasn't melted down, well, Victor Timely is going to be back. So now he's probably going to tell Victor Timely not to go out there because he knows that the temporal radiation will affect him, which makes me go back to my idea of, I don't know if Loki quite realizes it now, but he could very well be invulnerable to the temporal radiation, and he's going to go out there himself. But then what happens to Victor Timely? Who does Victor Timely go on to be if he's now going to be alive again? You could argue that he's just going to be dropped back off into his own period of time in where he was limited by the technology, which must be very frustrating for that character if it's just an ending like that, because he would have been shown all of this stuff, he would have been brought to the TVA just to be dropped off with all of that knowledge that you could do more, but you're just literally restricted. I'm not sure there, so let me know your predictions for Victor Timely in the finale, especially, again, he technically is back now, since we've now reversed time into where he was alive. But I now then go back to the whole idea of, well, don't forget how this was all orchestrated by He Who Remains. Remember how he got Miss Minutes and Renslayer, and that was part of his plan to drop off the TVA guidebook to Victor Timely, and then, look at where we are now. So what is the grand plan for what is going on? And is this still according to the plan of He Who Remains? There are still some, what you'd have to think, show-stopping moments yet to be pulled out, like the rug from under us in the finale, still yet to come. And I'm very intrigued as to what they're going to be, because I think some of them are obvious that, Loki is going to be the Loki who remains. But what it means for the extra things behind the curtains, how this affects other things, other characters, the MCU, the freaking, I don't know, continuity from here on out, I'm not sure, but I'm very intrigued to see. And, if Loki does become the Loki who remains, or the god of stories, how is he going to really be any better through ruling reality and narrative, if you will, if he is still the one orchestrating it like He Who Remains? Now, sure, you might say he gives it a bit more freedom, but if he's trying to prevent things, he's going to have to be measured in the way he forms this reality and narrative in the future. The same way, He Who Remains was forced to make certain decisions, like pruning other timelines to prevent other Kangs from popping up. How's Loki going to avoid problems like that? That's the stuff that I want to know. I mean, I can't imagine, surely he's not going to go back to the point in time in where Sylvie killed He Who Remains, because then this becomes a bit of a paradox situation, because if he stops that from happening, then technically he would never go on to, I guess, get the upgraded time-slipping power. Like, none of Season 2 would happen, especially with the power now making him as such that he's the Loki who was in the moment of where he time-slips back to. There's no longer a duplicate. So I don't know. I'm getting a headache now. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. I'm still very much so enjoying this series. Again, I have my little nitpicks here and there, but overall, I'm still really enjoying the story, and I can't wait to see where things go in that finale. Dying to know what you have to say. Any ideas as to what could be happening next week, let me know down in the comments below. Leave a like on this video if you did enjoy it. Of course, subscribe for more videos just like this. But until next time, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a lovely rest of your day. And I'll see you fellow Lokis in the next video. Goodbye.